For attending this this session about energy storage. So this morning we have 4 presentations about energy storage, and so each presentation will be 20 minutes, and then 5 minutes for the questions. And regarding the questions, either you will ask your question at the end, or if you want, you can also put a question in the chat, and it will be possible for me eventually to ask the question for you. So the first presenter this morning is Héctor Ramírez Molina from the University of Basel in Switzerland. And the title of the presentation is Energy Storage Investment in Switzerland, a household model approach linking heat and electricity. So Héctor, that's up to you for your presentation. And so you can share your screen. Oh, that's fine.
Yes, okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction. So good morning and welcome. First of all, I would like to thank you all for attending my presentation. And today I am going to talk about integration of renewable energy storage technologies into the Swiss household sector. This is work in progress, so any feedback will be highly appreciated. In this presentation, first I will introduce the context of the research, then I will talk about the model in a general way, and then I will discuss the results of simulations we have performed specifically with seasonal storage systems. And finally, I will close with the next steps for my research. And this is also a research conducted jointly with the University of Geneva and the University of Applied Science of Lucerne. So to begin with, the relevance of this project lies in many factors. First, in Switzerland, the household energy consumption represented 27% of the total energy consumed in the country in 2019, being the second largest consumption sector after the transportation. From this share, as we can see in this graph, the majority or the major share goes to heating. We have heating oil, we have gas, some share of electricity, wood and district heating here with 4% are mostly used for heating. So from this 27% at the national level, heating will be the major consumer in Switzerland. The Swiss heating systems in Switzerland are mostly fossil-based. As you can see in this graph, over the last 2 decades, heating oil has been replaced by natural gas, almost by a 1-on-1 relation. And even though there has been a shift in what main source of heating, of course, both are fossil fuels, and solar and electric options still remain with a relatively small market share. So the challenge of substituting fossil fuels then is great, since it's expected that the heated floor in Switzerland expands from now to 2050. And also the country has set ambitious decarbonization and environmental and climate goals for 2050 as well. So as I was mentioning, as in many other countries, Switzerland is aiming to profoundly transform its energy system. First of all, is to commission its nuclear power plants, and it phasing out fossil fuels in sectors such as heating. And it's also enhancing the use of renewable energy sources and more efficient technologies and more efficient use of energy in general. This plan So this plan is outlined in the Energy Transition 2050, which implies structural changes in the operation and management of energy systems, and the need to deploy more efficient and flexible technologies. What I'm showing here are the Energy Perspectives 2050, which are in line with the energy transition policy in a more ambitious way, because the energy transition was laid out in 2050, and this Energy Perspectives 2050 plus is coming out recently. So it's coming out now. It's very recent, and basically it includes several scenarios. But here I'm showing the goals for the net zero emission scenario and how to develop an energy system compatible with long-term climate goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, while ensuring secure supply of energy for the country. So I'm outlining here the numbers that we are interested in this project. So we are expecting to have 34 terawatt hours of generation from PV systems by 2050. Our current level is only 2 terawatt hours. Enhance future investments in electric battery systems, and to install 1.5 million heat pumps by 2050 as well. The current level is 300,000. And also implement policies for better isolated buildings, and thus reducing the heating demand of the residential sector. So currently there's lack of energy storage models, at the best of my knowledge, that are combining both electricity and heating demand from both the technical and regulatory framework. So we have identified this research gap, and we are developing a model that we consider multiple technology options, and will simulate different type schemes and support policies in a dynamic cost-based scenario decision model. So the idea is also to model at a great level of detail the technical characteristics of these technologies, and also understand interactions. For example, if we have a PV system with a seasonal storage, a thermal seasonal storage, what type of how would the operation of the systems will look like? So this is not very explored so far yet. Research has been very focused on systems, let's say only electric or only thermal. So we have a lot of research on PV and battery systems or heat pumps on the other side, on the heating side, but not the combination of PV and storage, for example, thermal storage. And we are trying to answer these questions here. Which leads me to the research questions, and that is, what is the role of energy storage technologies in contributing to a greater deployment of renewable energy and a more efficient and effective use of energy in the context of this Swiss energy transition? And then how do energy storage technology deployment based on individual actors' decision compared to the techno-economic environmental optimum? To answer these questions, we have developed in the framework of the Swiss Store project a bimodal approach. So here what you are seeing, and what I want you to grasp from this image, is that we have to compare two main models. The first is a social planner model, which is currently being developed by one of our partners in the project, the University of Geneva. And this model represents the real world, the ideal world, that is optimal technology deployment according to a certain objective. So let's say the social planner wants to reduce the cost of the overall system or has an objective of reducing the CO2, minimize the CO2 emissions for the whole Swiss energy systems. And then this will give us the optimal technology deployment to achieve this. In other words, what would be the best result for Swiss society as a whole? On the other hand, we have an investment actor decision model, where what we want to see is how we can align the individual interests of the economic actors to fulfill the social optimum. So here what we want to explore are different policies that will enhance the use of renewable energies in the residential sector, the transition of heating technologies from fossil fuel based to renewables or electricity as well. And then what type of policies we will need to make this change. And then we have a comparison between these two models, and we define a benchmark to compare these results. And we also have a transmission market model where we have an interaction from the result of the actor model, where we can determine here under the new technology choices of consumers. We will affect the demand, the supply and demand curves of the system, giving us a new electricity price to which the actors will react as well. So we have these dimensions here. First, we have the actor-based model. We have a dispatch model here of the electricity system. And then we have the social planner model, which we will use to compare results. The basic structure of the model is divided in 4 models. So first is the archetype description. So here we have a building archetype definition, where we take data from more than 3 million buildings in Switzerland, grouped in 300,000 archetypes, which are also defined by the geographical location. So we have here the COP, which is the coefficient of performance of a heat pump, for example. So we can have different efficiencies depending on the geographical location, solar generation data as well, 4 different climate cells. And we have in our data more than 20,000 climate cells along the whole country. And we have energy demand profiles, both electricity and heating, for each one of these archetypes. Then we have a model which is the technology description, where we define the technical and operational data of new technologies. We have a cost definition, the capital cost, operational cost, replacement cost as well. And then we define the archetype compatibility of each technology to certain archetypes. So we assume, for example, that if you have already a borehole in your backyard, then you will more likely choose a heat pump, a groundwater heat pump. Or if you don't have a gas connection, then you don't have within the range of the technologies you can choose, you won't be able to use a heating system. Then we move to an electricity optimization model, which minimizes the system for each archetype, the energy cost for different technology configurations, and chooses the least costly one. And then we have the model integration phase that I mentioned in the previous slide. So here is a basic model setting. We have an archetype, a household that can have a PV system. We have a heat pump that can also have an electric battery connected to the system. And then we have a seasonal storage system, domestic hot water, and all these are supplying the heating demand. And from the grid, we can supply the electricity demand also with the PV system and the battery. We can supply the electricity that the system needs. So a quick introduction to how the seasonal thermal energy storage system is modeled. We have 3 different compartments at 3 different temperature levels. So the first level is 35 degrees, the second is 60, the third is 90. And then the efficiency goes from depending on the temperatures we have. So this is the most efficient, second most efficient, and this one here, which is heated directly with an electric resistance, is 1. Then the volume is of each level relative to the size. This one is small, medium, and large. And then we have an independent charge and discharge for each one of these levels. Now I will talk about the seasonal storage simulation that we have. We have set tariff scenarios. We have no tariff, no feed-in tariff, low feed-in tariff, and high feed-in tariff. We have a flat consumption tariff, a normal tariff of 0.35 cents or happen here in Switzerland per kilowatt hours, which is the rate of the city where I'm living here in Basel. And then we have different rates of feed-in tariffs here. Then we have the seasonal storage relative capacity. This is relative to the total heating demand of the system. So if in winter you consume a certain amount, then this 32% means that the seasonal storage has the capacity to store 32% of your total demand. And then we have a PV relative capacity, which depends on the size of the roof area of the archetype. And then we assume for this one that we have 100% PV installed. So what we can see here, what we are seeing here is the state of charge of each of the levels, is that when we don't have feed-in tariffs, then at the start of the simulation here, at the end of winter, all levels charge to the fullest or almost to the fullest very quickly during the whole summer. And then the level starts to decay during winter when the demand is being supplied. When we have even a very, very small feed-in tariff, we see that the behavior changes completely, since now the archetype or the consumer will have an incentive to sell the energy, meaning that it will charge only the first 2 levels at different rates because of the difference in efficiency very shortly before winter, and then use it also when the demand is there. Something to notice here is that it's also charging during winter. So here the PV has also the capacity to supply heating or energy enough to charge the seasonal storage. And then when we have a very high feed-in tariff, we see that the incentive is the opposite. So instead of using the solar energy available in winter for heating, is actually exporting into the grid. So it's charging still during summer because this is supplied by the PV, and then it's just using that energy for exports. Here we have the electric balance. We have here in yellow the PV supply, and here we can see the different levels of charge of the seasonal storage. So this is the first 2 levels with the heat pump. This is the electric resistance, and as we can see from what we saw before, the levels of usage decay very rapidly, while the exports, which is here, increase a lot. We can see also here, this is the electricity balance, the energy balance for the whole year. And what I want you to see here is the supply again. So here we see that here we don't supply at all because there's no feed-in tariff. And here we're supplying during the whole summer and then charging here on this one, on this part, the seasonal storage. As we can see from the PV generation here in red, the system is charging the seasonal storage directly from the PV supply. Then here on the high feed-in tariff scenario, we can see that it's even supplying the solar energy as well during these periods. And we can see quickly here from the thermal balance, how the thermal losses when we don't have a feed-in tariff is 54% of all energy is being used for it's been lost by thermal losses into storage, well, here it's reduced to 7%. So we can conclude basically that here, when we don't have a feed-in tariff, we are basically burning the energy. So the conclusions for the seasonal storage simulation is the operation of the PV system and the seasonal storage is extremely sensitive to the tariff structure and installed PV capacity. Also, without a feed-in tariff scheme, the seasonal storage system is burning energy during summer. In the presence of a feed-in tariff, the seasonal storage is charged briefly only before the heating season starts. If the feed-in tariff is high enough, the system will feed into the grid even during winter. And for the selected seasonal storage, energy level 3 is no longer used, and that means more inefficient when there is a feed-in tariff. So I think I'm running out of time. I cannot see the chat here. But very quickly for the scenario development, we have defined 2 dimensions, policy and drivers, where we have drivers and we have climate, the climate driver, where we have different climate scenarios that will affect the heating demand of the archetypes and they will affect the efficiency as well of the heat pumps. And then we have the building stock with a retrofit rate that can be 1 or 2%, depending if it's high or low for the whole system. And then we have technology price developments. Also, we will try business as usual, optimistic and ambition policy scenarios where we have to find different CO2 taxes, subsidies, and fuel prices to run the model under these conditions so that the archetypes can choose differently depending on the policy and driver scenario that we choose.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Just for your conclusion, yes. Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. And so now, if there are some questions in the audience, if you want to ask a question, you can put the hand with Zoom. And if you go on the bar, or checking the discussion, no. So I will start with the first question, and maybe other question will arrive after. So you tested different scenarios with different configuration, finally, of feed-in tariff. So feed-in tariff for the PV generation.
Yes.
And what seems to be a little bit strange is that there seems to be like a threshold, because finally you have quite different results between no feed-in tariff and very low, 0.01.
Yes.
So it seems not really to be something with a progressive evolution regarding to the.
Yeah.
How can you explain that?
Well, that can be explained by the fact that we are basically at this stage, the consumer doesn't have any incentive to sell this energy. So basically, it can export it for free or can store it in the seasonal storage. And this is what we see here that it's doing. We have to remember that we have thermal losses in the system. So let's say if we charge the seasonal storage very early during summer, we will lose a lot of energy during this whole period. And then what we see here, when there's just the minimum incentive to export or to gain something from that energy you're generating for free, let's say with PV, for free quoting, then what the system does is that starts exporting that energy to the grid and stops burning that energy. So just before the heating season starts and the heating demand starts, because we have also perfect foresight in this model, then we see that it charges here the seasonal storage. But just with the more efficient levels, not the third one, which is the most inefficient. But what we see here basically is that you're not gaining nothing from doing this. It will be exactly the same if the system will just export it for free.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we also see here with the grid exports here. You see that here it's basically almost zero. And then here we have a big grid export. So basically we have a transfer of energy from the seasonal storage to the grid once we have just the minimum incentive to profit.
So finally, I think that an important technical characteristic is the losses of the storage system. If you want the losses of the storage system, because if you had a very efficient thermal storage system,
exactly.
You could store for a long time and to keep this energy.
Sure. If you will have, for example, here again, you see that the relative losses, this is the thermal balance. Here, with no feed-in tariffs is 54%. And already here, it declines to 20%. And when you have a very high feed-in tariff, it's 7%, meaning that here, basically, you're just burning energy. You're charging the system and then wasting that energy. And if you have, let's say, a better isolation, thermal isolation, then you will have maybe something similar to here, but you see also you will need a bigger system because here it's filled up very quickly. And then when it's completely full, the system is in the same position. It's either burning more energy or just exporting it for free.
Okay. And in your case, what can you recall the size of the thermal storage, and regarding to the size in winter, how many days can you supply heating?
So here, this will be 32% of the total heating demand of all winter.
Okay.
Well, let's say you could supply maybe a month with this size. We did a sensitivity analysis. We tested different sizes, so 32, even 100%, and also with different PV capacities as well. So I'm mentioning here, this is PV max because we use the whole roof surface of this specific archetype to install PV, but we also did like 1/2 of the total capacity, 1/3, and then see how the system will react to that as well.
Okay. There is a question. The question can be asked directly, or I will. So it's saying it is a question from Gina. Your model shows the dispatch is more efficient with high feed-in tariff. How will the feed-in tariff influence the investment decision? And do you expect an impact which may be not sufficient? For example, the oversize of storage.
Well, in this case, the feed-in tariff, basically the existence of the feed-in tariff will make the system more profitable in general. So you will have higher gains from installing these technologies. So you will, let's assume, I mean, if you have this PV max, you will be paid more quickly. You will have, if you have a battery system, it will be paid also quicker. And then in terms of the seasonal storage, I guess the main difference would be the size of the storage, maybe. So you could maybe have a bigger storage, but there's a balance, because there's a marginal price of heating that the system basically, once the feed-in tariff is higher than this marginal price, then it will export it. So as long as the heating price is lower, it will use the seasonal storage. Otherwise, it will export it. So there's a trade-off there, and there's a balance that you can see here. When we have a very low tariff, you see that the seasonal storage has been used more than when we have a very high tariff, because basically here the architect, what it's doing, it's selling that energy to the grid because it's more profitable than using it for heating.
Okay, so thank you for your presentation and thank you for the discussion. So now we will have to go for the next presenter. So you can stop sharing your screen. And so the next presenter is so Hasan Ümitcan Yilmaz from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And the title of the presentation is a method for modeling of the hydro storage power plants in power plant dispatch models with rolling horizon approach.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see. So
You see your presentation.
as soon as you're ready, you can start.
Okay, thank you. Hello again from my side. Yeah, as introduced, my name is Ümitcan Yilmaz. I'm working as a postdoc in Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. Today, I'm going to present you the work with the title Method for Modeling of Hydro Storage Power Plants in Power Plant Dispatch Model with Rolling Horizon Approach. As the title says, in this work, we are tackling with a better modeling of storage power plants. We do not provide detailed information of modeling other hydro power plants. So in fact, there are many other types of hydro power plants. One of them is just hydro storage power plants. And hydro storage power plants have a very large reservoir. So the stored hydropower in the reservoir can be dispatched flexibly for power generation. These power plants have water inflows, and these inflows also fluctuate over the years. But due to the high storage capacity, these seasonal fluctuations can also be compensated, and the hydropower can be dispatched flexibly. In a second important type, a second important type is run-of-river hydro power plants. So these are built alongside the rivers. They either have no storages at all or only a limited amount of storage. These plants are mainly used as a base load power plant since they cannot be dispatched very flexibly. The third important type is pumped storage power plants. So they have two different storage basins, a lower basin and an upper basin. So water is pumped from the lower basin to the upper basin when electricity prices in the system are lower, and so on. This refers to the storage of electricity during the times when electricity prices in the system are higher. This stored hydropower is used again for power generation. Yeah, these are some major types, but there are also other types of hydro storage power plants, such as tidal power plants and wave power plants. As I said, we will just focus on hydro storage power plants, modeling of hydro storage power plants. I also briefly want to mention you the energy system model I used. This is just an exemplary energy system model, so the approach can be relatively easily applied to other energy system models. This model is called PERSES EU. This is an energy system optimization model for Europe. It includes 27 European countries, UK, Switzerland, Norway, but excludes Cyprus and Malta since they are isolated from the European grid. The main decision variables are production levels, cross-border electricity exchange levels, and the objective of the optimization is the minimization of the total costs. This model has technical, ecological, and political constraints, and this is a mixed integer linear optimization problem. Therefore, have also binary variables, and therefore the optimization problem is quite complex. And for this reason, we use this rolling horizon approach to model 1 year in our resolution. So this is I use a power plant dispatch version of PERSA's EU model here. So this rolling horizon approach is a popular approach. It's used to reduce the execution time of power plant dispatch models. The problem can be decomposed into many sub-problems with shorter time horizons. You see here a demonstration. The sub-problems are then solved successively and individually. In this way, parameters from the future time intervals are not considered in previous sub-problems, and computing of each sub-problems becomes more efficient and more easily. This makes it possible to solve the whole optimization problem. We solve the whole optimization problem just by successively solving each smaller individual sub-problems. The rolling horizon approach is, as I said, widely used in the power plant dispatch models. The approach is either motivated by including uncertainty and reduction of the computational time. But this approach is normally suitable for power plant dispatch models because the power plants in these power plant dispatch models are scheduled based on their variable costs. Also, in the reality, they are scheduled like this. Therefore, to decide on the dispatch of the power plants, no information on the long-term future is necessary. The short-term time horizon problem is the problem of the short time horizon of the sub-problems is enough for the dispatch decision. But for these kind of technologies, for example, in order to make profit, the power plants must be able to cover their variable costs and then fixed costs, because for thermal power plants, the variable costs are mainly determined by the costs of fuel and maybe also emission certificates. However, this is really different for the hydro storage power plants. There are hardly any variable costs for hydro storage power plants. Therefore, the operators of the hydro storage power plants weigh their use of water in a present time against the use of water in a future time. So this means that more or less the decision of the power plant must take into account the long time horizons, since the use in the present can really restrict or even prevent the use of the water in the future. So we can say that the dispatch decision depends much more on the current storage level, the expected future inflows, and then a future price development of the electricity market. Since the storage volume is limited, the water should be used as economically as possible. This is why the short time horizon of sub-problems in the rolling horizon approach is not sufficient for hydro storage power plants. This can lead either to overly dispatch the hydro storage power plants in the first sub-problems of the rolling horizon, and this may also lead to shortages. Here on this graph, you see this. The blue line is showing it if we use rolling horizon without adding any further restrictions to the model would then use the available whole water in the first optimization steps. In addition, if new new natural inflows comes through to the reservoir, they would also be used as soon as possible. So here you can also see. But this green line is perfect foresight. Yeah, the model is mainly doing this because the variable cost of hydro storage power plants are quite low. It's like free electricity for the model if you don't consider the future. This is the main problem we are tackling here. Due to the model complexity, we have to use rolling horizon in such power plant dispatch models because the complexity is high. We have thousands of binary variables, and if we reduce the long-term view of the model for sub-problems, this we cannot efficiently or meaningfully dispatch the hydro storage power plants. So here I will briefly show you what we have done for this. Here I briefly want to first demonstrate you some of the important equations for hydro storage power plants. First formula refers to the storage levels. So the reservoir level depends on the previous storage level. So the storage level in T-1 and plus the natural inflows to the reservoir in time T and the amount of hydropower used from, so minus the amount of hydropower used from the reservoir. So since reservoirs are restricted, we also have an upper and lower level. A lower level is required for the environment. So you see here second and third equations. And in a fourth equation, we also use an initial level for the storage. This is somehow derived from historical data. So until here, we have to implement. Now, for the rolling horizon approach, in addition to these equations, we use two more equations. One of them is max. So this one, max hydro storage for each subproblem. The use of, so what we do is the use of water in each subproblem is limited with this value, max hydro. So we see here. And here you see the brief calculation of it. And now I will present you how we calculate this max hydro values. So getting this max hydro value is not quite easy. So we develop also to solve the problem and to calculate this max hydro. We developed a 3-step optimization structure for modeling these power plants. In these 3 steps, we gradually reduce the aggregation of the time slices, do it step by step, and introduce always more information to the model. In a first step here, you see this is the first step. This is a perfect foresight model executed over 365 model time slices. So we really strongly aggregate the time structure of the model, time resolution of the model, and then run it once. And in a second step, we use the results from the first optimization to restrict the hydro storage, hydropower usage in a second optimization step. So for example, here is 20 days, and this first optimization problem is also 20 days. Therefore, we restrict the total amount of hydropower here with the amount used in the first 20 days of the step 1. So here we have this restriction. And in the step 3, so here a rolling horizon approach is used in step 2. In step 3, we also use a rolling horizons approach. And again, we restrict the storage volumes, but this time we use the storage volumes of each 5 days to use the storage volumes of the subproblems, because here you see each subproblem is 5 days, and here we just need the values for each 5 days. After doing this, maybe I can show you that the country results, so this is for only Austria, one specific country, the results of the model for perfect foresight and rolling horizon models come quite closely. Therefore, the result seems quite good for them. You see here the correlation is 90.995. And then, but there is another last issue to be solved. Now you see the comparison of the storage levels and a perfect foresight model of for only one country. So these are simpler models we just run for only one country. It's normally not possible to run the whole optimization problem as perfect foresight. So, but even in perfect foresight, we see that the historical levels are not met. Here in the green, so this green line is real dispatch. So we get this from INCE, this is the data. And this blue line is, perfect sight, the results of perfect foresight model. To solve this issue, we also introduced minimum flows to the energy system modeling. So there are laws in many countries for this, and this is necessary for the environment and for the fishes and so on. So, but now we have in our optimization 3 optimization steps. So we use the different minimum levels for different steps of the optimizations. Since the aggregation is different in each optimization step, we should do this. In the first optimization step, we use the 0.5 quantile of the possible historical consumption over 7 consecutive days. And in 7 and 3rd restriction, we just use 0.01 quantile of historical hourly consumption over 30 days. Now, and here you see you see the restriction which we added to the model. And now, after implementing these restrictions into the different steps of the optimization problem, I want to show you the comparison of the results with historic values. So you see here the correlation values. Yeah, they get much better. For the countries with higher reservoir, we get always much better results. The countries with lower reservoir have yeah, 90.94 correlation. This is Pearson correlation. And looking at these results, we can conclude that the application of the presented method allows us the modeling of hydro-storage power plants in power plant dispatch models with rolling horizon, as I showed with quite good results. And the big advantage of this method is that we only include new restrictions to the existing models, and the time horizon of the model has to be adapted. So therefore, this method can be transferred easily to some other energy system models. And one of the main critique points is that we want to emphasize is that we want to define values for minimum water flows, and we can say that the inclusion of these minimum flows leads to increased use of hydro storage power plants at night significantly and improves the results. However, as I said, we derive these values from historical data. Yeah, I should say that it's necessary to analyze more data or to analyze the data further to get better results. And I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So now it is time for some questions. If someone has a question. Yes, Jan-Philipp.
Hello. Yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. I just wanted to ask quickly, in case I missed it. So is the model an operational model without capacity investment, or does it also include capacity investment? And there I wanted to just ask if it includes capacity investment, how does rolling horizon influence that?
Mm-hmm. The model I used do not have capacity investment. It's just the dispatch of the power plant within a year. So we just have 1 year time horizon.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's go to the slide maybe. We have only here 1 year time horizon, and the 1 year time horizon is dispatched like this. It's not dispatched over several years. It's just each subproblem has some days, and it doesn't have any expansion.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Here we have energy production levels or cross-border exchanges as main decision variables. We do not include capacity expansion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other question? Seems not. Just one question. In your case, regarding to hydro storage plant, is it reversible storage or only storage from pure dam? So,
So
is it a pumping storage or not?
no, it's not a pumping storage. We just focus on, so I presented 3 types. We just focus on only hydro storage power plant. It's not. Also, we have also the modeling of other storage types, and we have also pump storage power plants and so on included in the model. But this works just mainly focuses on hydro storage power plants.
Okay. And so when you present the results and when you make the comparison with historical data, you show 4 countries. And so how do you explain why it doesn't work so good for Austria?
Yeah, I really try to analyze the detail. So one reason, I guess, is the main problem. So the main issue we found was the lower storage levels for Austria, lower than Norway and Sweden and so on. So smaller reservoirs, I mean. But that's not the only explanation. I think in Austria, the power plants are really dispatched in short term to somehow compensate the fluctuations in short term. So they are really very intensively used. And Austria is located somewhere in the middle of Europe, and it has also a lot of connections to Germany and so on. So to get a very better results for Austria, we should also look at the modeling capability of the model for Germany, France, and so on. So any interactions between these countries also influence the results of Austria. So this is not purely from because of the modeling of hydro storage power plants. This also a little bit depends on how good the model can estimate whole power plant dispatch historically. So of course the models cannot perfectly meet the historical values.
So there is also 2 other questions. First, a question by Adrienne. For the step 1 of your method, she asked, how did you choose the step horizon? So it is 20 days. So how do you make this choice of 20 days? And does it influence the results? For example, if you consider the 30 days instead of 20 days for the step 1.
Yeah, we experimented on this a little bit. We chose for our model, of course, if you use any other models, you should really look at your borders of your execution. So we wanted to do it as fast and as possible, and wanted to have a model which we can solve quite fast in the first optimization steps and so on. And then the results were quite good with this type of aggregation. So I can say that we really experimented with the model and came up with these values. These are just exemplary values, and the model we use is also an exemplary model. For each type of models, these parameters should be tested at first. But
yes, finally, a small sensitivity analysis could be done.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and so the last question regarding to, so how is the share of increasing renewables can change the dispatch decision of hydropower storage, as the prices may be low for period with high share of renewables. So finally, what could be the influence of the decision for using hydro, depending on the price, electricity price, considering that the price will depend on the level of renewable sources. We can see in Europe sometimes we have some negative prices of electricity when there is a much large amount of renewables. So do you test some situation and do you think that your model is robust regarding to such situations?
Yes, we tested something. The main reason why we wanted to develop this approach was to model the hydro storage power plants in Norway. So there is this hypothesis that the hydro storage power plants in Norway, Sweden, and so on, so especially in Norway, can be used to store renewable power. In the times with higher electricity production from renewable energy sources in Germany, we see that after using this approach, we see higher flows to the Norway and so on. So,
yeah. So finally, you consider a connection between the different countries, and you have seen that.
Yes, the renewable
there is
amount,
the DC cables between Germany and Norway too.
Yes, we mainly analyze those flows afterwards, and after applying this approach, we see that the flows increase. And so, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, and you can see all the questions in the chat. So now you can stop sharing your screen, and the next presentation will be done by Yang. So that's okay for the present. We can see your screen. No problem with that.
Great.
So you can put that's fine. So
thank you for the introduction.
Your presentation is about the assessment of regional energy storage system deployment for energy transition with the use case in Taiwan. So up to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and this is Miriam, and I'm from Taiwan. This is 2 p.m. in Taipei, and I know it's a very early in Europe, so I try to make my presentation. I speak relatively slow so that you can hear better. And because this research is made when I was a student last year in my master degree. So I only have 1 year to make this model and try to answer how to deploy energy system in Taiwan in 2025. So the model is relatively simple compared with previous model, and I think we can have some time to discuss the details. So let's begin. I'm Miriam from Industrial Technology Research Institute in Taiwan. And because of the pandemic, this paper should have published last year. And I appreciate that there's still a stage for this paper to share. And I hope you are all well. The core of this paper is to use a linear programming optimization model to deal with Taiwan's energy supply and energy storage system deployment problem in 2025. And this is the outline of today's proposal. As you may not be familiar with my country, I will briefly introduce energy situation in Taiwan. Also, I will talk about the dot curve and the energy transition issue in Taiwan. The second period goes through the construction of the model. I will describe the functions and the data processing of the short-term power dispatch model. And the third part will be the empirical results. The fourth will be the results and the discussion in this research. Oh, oops, sorry. Okay, so the part one is the introduction of this study. As you may know, Taiwan is a small island country nearby mainland China. We have an isolated power grid, and our main power source comes from thermal power. We rely on imported fuels over 89%, and which means that energy security is always an issue in Taiwan. The below chart is the pie of electricity portfolio by sources in Taiwan to 2020. We can see that the coal-fired power and nuclear accounts for most of the power generation. On the other hand, the renewable energy only accounts for 5.6%. As defined by ARENA, energy transition is a pathway toward transforming the global energy sector from fossil-based to zero carbon, and its aim to reduce CO2 emission to limit climate change. So our government has set an ambitious target for the energy transition. There will be no more nuclear power after 2025, and they try to reach the ratio of renewable energy to 20% to pursue cleaner energy. So the total capacity target of solar power will be 20 gigawatt, including 3 gigawatt roof type, 17 gigawatt ground type. Also, a long-term target of wind power capacity will be 7 gigawatt, consisting of inland wind power and offshore wind power. As you may be familiar, this is the case of California dot curve, and this study clearly defines non-dispatch renewable energy as renewable energy, such as wind power and solar power that the operators cannot control. And other types of renewable energy that are dispatchable, we call DRE, are, for example, hydroelectricity, biomass, geothermal, and ocean thermal energy. And as we all know that the ratio of VRVE getting higher, the dot curve are more obvious. From the California case, we knew that when the portion of VRE is getting higher, the residual load curve, also we can call it the net load curve, is getting steeper. So we can see from the below chart, which is borrowed from IAEA, that there will be an intense energy demand in the evening. This is because of the output of PV fall down and cause an immediate need for traditional energy. We want to know that whether the dot curve will also appear in Taiwan in 2025. And also we have to respond to the director of our Department of Nature, Ministry of Science and Technology. They want to know that in 2025, we know we will have 20% of renewable energy. And some setting, will there be enough power to use? And if we need energy storage system, how do we deploy this load system? And how much do we need? So this study simulates a future energy supply and policy situation based on a relatively simple linear programming model. And there are some, and the slide shows the purpose and the limitations of this model. This study focused on VRE power generating and energy storage deployment. So we address the following areas, including first one, we construct a short-term power dispatch model and simulates the actual operation of future energy storage system. And in the end, we suggest the future energy deployment suggestions. Well, as in this model, we collect lots of the cost information, including all kinds of energy, but the cost information and the future price of electricity is relative sensitive in Taiwan, especially in nowadays political situation. So our sponsor of this project do not wish we to publish the information of the prediction of this of the future prices. And as for the limitations of this paper, because the project is only for a year and lack of the time and resources, there are some limitations. For example, the development of electrical power supply and demand outside this island of Taiwan is excluded, which means we only considers the power supply and demand situation only in Taiwan island. Those outside islands are not considered. And for the second one, the stability, operational problems, and emergency events related to the system are excluded. And the third one, the cost of power transmission and distribution operation are excluded. We only focus on the cost regarding to the generation side. Okay, so the next step will be the introduction of the model building. I want to show the basic idea of linear programming model first. Linear programming is also called linear optimization as a model is a method to achieve the best outcome, such as the maximum profit or the lowest cost in a mathematical model, whose requirements are represented by linear relationship. A general linear programming problem can be expressed as this plot. These linear equations represent resource constraints. So if multiple conditions are met, a feasible solution region will be formed. We want to find the solution with the minimized cost or maximum benefit in this blue area. So my model are constructed below these functions. This slide shows the objective functions and the constraints of the short-term power dispatch model. The objective functions considers the economy of power, which in terms of minimize total generation cost. And as we all know, the generation cost, including the fixed capital cost and the operational cost. So as the generation gets more, the cost will get higher. And the constraints including power demands, policies, generator capacities, energy storage system, and non-negative restrictions. And for energy storage system, there are some quite complicated settings. For there's only 20 minutes in this presentation, so I will not mention very detailedly. If you are interested, welcome to my paper. It will be the details of these functions. So the core of this research purpose is to simulate the supply status when achieving the energy transition target in 2025. And most of the power planning model in Taiwan divide the simulation period into years, which has a shortage of showing the operation of energy storage system. Thus, we design the model in a more detailed way. We set a modified unit in an hour, and there will be 24 hours represent a day in 1 month to reflect that different power supply of variable energy and power demand in each season. And for energy storage needs, we cut a day into 4 periods to reflect the peak hours, half-peak hours, and the rest of the time, so that you can see there's P1, P2, P3, and P4. The P2 represent the peak hours that that the power demand is the highest in a day. So in this slide, you can see that the seasonal difference between the capacity factors of offshore wind power and the PV. The below charts, you can see that in Taiwan, wind power performs better in autumn and winter, and while solar power generates more power in summer. We put this seasonal data into the model based on that 3 years experience. So the model calculates future VRE generation close to reality. And as for the data processing of the cost information, the costs from traditional power are mainly from published data by Taiwan company, the only energy utility in Taiwan. And we first collect the past power cost data and look for future fuel price and renewable energy cost prediction, and then adjust this cost data to 2025. We know that the future fuel price may rise, and as for the technology getting mature, the capital cost of new renewable energy may go down. So after this adjustment of the future cost information, we put them into the model. And generating cost of power units, we can divide them into fixed cost and variable cost. So the fixed cost refer to the input of fixed capital, such as generator sets. And in this study, we refer to the new capacity installing schedule that published by the government, and the variable costs refer to each power unit's fuel operation and maintenance price in the power supply, so it varies with its annual power generation. So after collecting and sorting of this data, we conduct a post-mortem simulation for the model for Taiwan's power generation in 2019. The simulation results show that the model has a high degree of credibility under these assumptions. The only resource that differs from reality is due to the coal reduction in the air pollution event in 2019. The model is set to minimize the cost, choosing to use more coal-fired power generation, and that to the difference. So after the verification, on this page, we present the main output of the simulation result in 2025. We plot the power supply curve by source and the power demand prediction in August. And the reason for selecting August as a representative month is that August is the hottest month in Taiwan, and therefore it consumes the most electricity and is most prone to power shortage in the summer season. So as you can see, the curve in this figure is power demand prediction by the model. We refer to the population, the GDP, and as the climate change, the temperature. So we can get the annual prediction electricity demand in the future. And in this plot, the orange part is the supply of traditional energy, and the light green part is the VRE. The blue one is DRE. And the dark green part is the energy dispatched by the energy source system. So from this picture, we can find that the spike in demand for traditional energy sources appears after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. VRE provides a large amount of energy at noon due to the decline in solar output in the afternoon. So it needs to be matched with the rapid increase of traditional power to make up of the electricity gap. And from this during the peak hours of daylight, solar power can provide 20 to 30% of electricity in a single hour, while wind power can provide as much 2.5 at night. at night. And the result also indicate that energy storage system can smooth out the sharp decline of PV electricity at sunset by storing excess solar energy at noon and releasing in the evening. So as a result, total energy storage system can provide 2.6% to 3.1% of total electricity during evening. As a result, the model suggests installing to 620 megawatt energy storage system to cooperate with solar power and smooth the power supply. In this study, the model recommends 8, 34, and 578 megawatt capacity of energy storage system in each region of Taiwan, because the southern part of Taiwan has the largest PV and has a great output of the solar power and needs the most energy storage system. And going back to the question we asked at the beginning, is there a dot curve in Taiwan in the future? The answer will be yes. Our peak time will shift to the evening. This will test the reliance of traditional units. Good power grid design and the combination of energy storage system will be an important key to future energy stability. So the above is a report of this research. Thank you from all over the world, and thank you for giving us your attention. I hope these contents can give you some inspiration for your research. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. So now, is there some questions by the audience? And check if there is a question in the chat. No. Just one question. In the slide 9.
Slide 9.
Yes, if you can
Here?
come back. Yes, here. So just can you recall what is the generation DRE? It is a dispatchable renewables?
Oh. Yeah, the dispatchable renewable energies, such as geothermal and the biomass power. And the blue plot here are main conducted by the biomass in Taiwan.
Okay, so here, but here when you present such a curve, finally you have a power demand. We can see that finally we could say that you have too much generation possibly. So with your model, here you will decrease the traditional generation to balance the demand.
Yeah, the storage, the PV energy storage caught the peak in the noon and then support them in the evening. So we can see the deep green color here.
Yes. So, but if we consider, for example, that yes, it can be in the evening at 8. You have about 5,000 megawatt of possibly extra generation.
You mean the night generation of the energy storage system?
And so here because in your optimization problem regarding your constraints, you must have the balancing between the demand and the generation.
Yeah. And there's also a setting of smoothing the power supply and the mechanism setting of the energy storage system. So the deep green in the night shows that the power supply of the wind power can also be released in the night times. So that the power supply curve may be smoother than the original one.
Yes, but why? In fact, why I don't? Because here, if it is the results of your model,
The reason.
so you make the dispatch between the different between the generation to meet the demand.
Sorry, I did not hear clearly of your question. Is how
So
do the model
your model allow you to make a dispatch?
Yes.
And so you should have the balance, perfect balancing between the demand and the generation.
Yes.
But on your curve, on your figure here, I don't see that because you have more generation than demand. Because you have for example, at 12 you have more than 10 gigawatt of variable generation, and you have an extra generation of 5 gigawatt. So why your model don't reduce, I imagine, the traditional generation?
Oh, I understand.
Just to meet the demand and to balance the demand.
That is the legislative restriction, and in Taiwan, the law defines that we need to prepare 50% of the operating reserve margin. So the power supply needs to make up 50% more than the power demand. So you can see that in the noon time, the VRE generates more than the yellow line because of that law restrictions.
Yes, okay. So here in such a figure, you also have the reserve finally. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the last presentation will be done by Jan-Philipp Sasse from University of Geneva in Switzerland. So you can share your screen. And so the title of the presentation is Electricity Generation, Storage and Transmission for Central Europe in 2035, and trade-offs between cost-optimal and near-optimal scenarios.
Yeah.
So up to you, Jan-Philipp.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. We changed a bit the title because this is already published with this one. And so here we looked at regional impacts of the electricity system transition in Central Europe until the year 2035. So exactly. So in Europe, with the European Green Deal, there's a vision to go climate neutral by the year 2050. And there are two key elements. Two of the key elements of this vision is first, a large-scale deployment of renewable electricity to provide clean electricity in the future. And also a second key element that, of this vision is to have an inclusive and equitable transition that benefits or provides economic growth also for all regions. So as mentioned, this vision requires a large-scale deployment of renewable capacities. Here you can see the scale of renewable electricity that is needed to reach net zero until the year 2050, and also the decrease in fossil fuels that is needed. On a spatial level, however, renewable capacities so far are unevenly deployed across regions. So there's inequalities in terms of regional deployment. Such an uneven deployment of renewable capacities and also other infrastructure indicates that there are associated uneven regional impacts across Europe. So some European regions might benefit from the chances for economic development and also new employment opportunities, for example, additional jobs in solar, wind, and also storage sectors. And however, other regions might have disproportionately high burdens, such as, for example, increased electricity costs, also visual impacts, for example, from wind turbines, or for example, job losses that are associated to phasing out coal, for example. So the research questions of this study are, what are the regional impacts of reaching renewable electricity targets in Central Europe by 2035 in terms of the system costs, the employment that are associated to the electricity sector, the greenhouse gas and particulate matter emissions, and also land use, and how equally are these regional impacts distributed, and what are the trade-offs between minimizing total system costs, maximizing regional equality, and also maximizing renewable electricity generation. So to answer this question, we use a soft-linked electricity system model called Expanse and PIPESA. And with this setup, we have a high spatial resolution model with 650 NUTS 3 level regions of Central Europe. So we look at 6 different countries, which you can see over here. And we model at hourly resolution for the single year of 2035. So we're interested in the year 2035. And the key features of this model is that we have high spatial resolution, so not 3 level regions. We also look at not only model the infrastructure requirements for different scenarios, but also the regional impacts of those scenarios. So in terms of system costs, employment, greenhouse gas emissions, particulate matter emissions, and land use. And what we're also interested in is to measure inequalities and equalities of impacts, which we measure with the Gini index. Key feature also of the Expanse model is that it uses modeling to generate alternatives. So this is a method for us to not only look at cost optimal scenarios, but also look at many diverse near optimal scenarios of the electricity sector. So these are near optimal spatial allocation scenarios with near optimal costs, and near optimal is defined with as scenarios with up to 20% higher system costs. The model itself includes electricity generation, storage, and transmission, and it's does both hourly operation and also long-term capacity investment. As you can see here, this is a technology-rich model. So we look at different types of generation technologies, such as offshore and onshore wind, open field and rooftop solar PV, but also other storage technologies, such as the traditional pumped hydro storage or large storage dams, but also new technologies such as battery and hydrogen storage. Here I would like to briefly go over the setup of our scenarios. So we look at the year 2035. We have 100 scenarios. So we call these 100 modeling to generate alternative scenarios, in short, MGA scenarios. So these are scenarios with cost optimal and near optimal total system costs. We also have a benchmarking scenario, which we call the frozen generation capacity scenario. So as the name suggests, here we keep the current electricity generation capacity the same, so of the year 2018, but we allow to flexibly install storage and also transmission infrastructure by the model to accommodate the 8% increase in electricity demand, which we have set for all scenarios the same. So both frozen and also 100 MGA scenarios. And from the 100 MGA scenarios, we then select 3 distinct scenarios, which to look at the trade-offs, specifically the scenario with the least total system costs, then one that maximizes regional equality of system costs per capita, and also one that maximizes renewable electricity generation within the near optimal system costs. We also implement other constraints, specifically the country level targets that are defined by the national energy and climate plans of the individual countries, which we derive for the year 2035. So for example, for Denmark, we ensure that there's 100% renewable electricity supply, and for Germany, at least 70% renewable electricity supply. So this is the setup of the model. So now we go to the results. Here you can see the near optimal feasible range of the electricity system for the year 2035 in terms of installed capacity and electricity generation for all the generation technologies that we have modeled. So what you can see here is that some technologies such as biomass, geothermal, and large hydro are more technically and economically constrained. So there's not there's quite a narrow feasible range for these technologies, while the feasible range is much wider for wind, and solar PV, but also nuclear, hard coal, and also gas. So this kind of indicates the structural uncertainty of options that are associated to these technologies. What we can also see here is that we highlight with the distinct scenarios, we can see that different technologies improve different aims. So for example, large hydro improves cost efficiency of the system, as well as also offshore wind, while solar PV improves regional equality across the system due to the fact that solar PV can be installed in many places all across Central Europe. And we also found that nuclear improves renewable electricity integration. We also looked at the near optimal feasible range of storage capacity and grid expansion. And maybe an interesting finding here is that with the targets defined for the year 2035, a cost-efficient and also system, and also one that maximizes equality, encourages rather low storage capacity, or requires very low storage capacity, and also quite low grid expansion, with the lowest being the one that maximizes equality. And for scenarios that sort of overachieve, go beyond the targets and maximize renewable electricity generation within the cost constraints, requires higher storage requirements for hydrogen and battery, and also one of the highest grid expansion requirements. We also looked at the near optimal feasible range of costs, and here below you can see more social and environmental impacts. So in terms of the employment impacts, greenhouse gas emissions, particulate matter emissions, and land use. And from here you can see that employment is highest for scenarios that maximize renewable electricity generation, simply because of the fact that it requires a lot of additional capacities, which encourages more employment. And maximizing renewable electricity generation leads to lowest amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, but also particulate matter emissions. While for this year of 2035, a cost-efficient system encourages rather high emissions compared to all other scenarios. And one scenario that maximizes regional equality is sort of in the middle between these scenarios. Land use is highest for scenarios that maximize renewable electricity generation, but also that maximize regional equality, while it is quite low, but still requires an increase in land use to reach a cost-efficient system that achieves those targets. So overall, achieving the targets will increase land use for all our scenarios. And here we look at the spatial distribution of system costs. So here I'm comparing the specific scenario minimum system costs with the one that with frozen generation capacity. So here you can see the differences. So for example, in red, you would see increase in system costs compared to the system that represents the current system, and in green decreases, right? And on the right side, we can see sort of how this correlates with the generation capacity total ones, but also the changes, so newly commissioned ones and the decommissioned capacities. And from this, we can see that minimizing system costs encourages a spatial concentration of system costs, especially in coastal regions where it is cost efficient to install additional offshore wind and also onshore wind. And this encourages a decline in system costs more in inland regions from decreased nuclear capacity and also a decreased fossil fuel capacity. Maximizing regional equality of system costs encourages a more even distribution of electricity system infrastructure, mostly even distribution of generation capacity from solar and wind in more inland regions. And this, so maximizing equality also encourages an even steeper decline of fossil fuels in Germany and also Poland. Maximizing renewable electricity generation has sort of a combined pattern. So there's both a steep increase in costs linked to solar and wind capacity in coastal regions, but also in more inland regions in the south of France, for example, and south of Germany. And this leads to the steepest decline, largest decline of fossil fuel generation, mostly in Germany and in Poland. So we also look at the spatial distribution of impacts of employment, emissions, and also land use. And we can see here that the spatial distribution of employment follows a similar pattern like costs. So this is linked to the infrastructure capacities that are installed in these regions. We find that greenhouse gas emissions and also particulate matter emissions reductions are much more spatially concentrated. So this is only concentrated to the regions that currently generate a lot of electricity from combusting fossil fuels. So this is mostly in Central Europe, in Germany and also Poland. And land use, we can see that it increases from top to bottom. So minimizing system costs requires a relatively low land use, while maximizing renewable electricity generation leads to the highest land use requirements. And here we can see the trade-offs between costs, regional equality, and renewable electricity generation. So here on the x-axis, you can see the regional equality of system costs, which we measure with the Gini index. So on the left side, we see less equality, and on the right side, more equality of system costs. And from this curve, we highlight the three distinct scenarios of minimum system costs, maximizing equality, and maximizing renewable electricity. And from this, we can see that there's a very strong trade-off between these aims. So these cannot be reached at the same time due to the fact that these are on the complete opposite ends of the scenario spectrum. So minimizing system costs encourages inequalities of system costs and also low renewable electricity generation, while maximizing equality, regional equality encourages higher system costs and also average amounts of renewable electricity. Maximizing renewable electricity encourages very high system costs and average amounts of regional equality. Here we also look at regional equality of all impacts, which we measure with the Gini index. So a lower Gini index indicates more equal impacts, and higher Gini index indicates less equal impacts. So from this, we can see that minimizing system cost encourages inequalities of not only system costs, but all impacts. So also inequalities of employment and emissions and land use, while maximizing regional equality leads to equalities, encourages equalities of all impacts. Maximizing renewable electricity generation rather encourages equality across all impacts. So the overall conclusions of the study are compared to 2018, Central European electricity targets of 2035 increase system costs by 12 to 22%. They increase regional equality of system costs by 18 to 43%, and would increase renewable electricity generation by 97 to 140%. We found that the regional impacts of costs, employment, emissions, and land use are mostly driven by changes in generation capacity from solar PV, wind, nuclear, coal, and gas. We found that the aims of improving cost efficiency, regional equality, and renewable electricity have vastly different implementation pathways and cannot be reached at the same time. So a system that minimizes cost encourages regional inequalities, not only of infrastructure, but also of all the impacts that we quantified. Maximizing regional equality of system costs encourages regional equalities, but has overall higher impacts, so aggregated impacts. And maximizing renewable electricity generation reduces regional inequalities, but leads to severe costs and land use impacts. So thank you very much.
So thank you for your presentation. So now it's time for some questions. We still have about 5 minutes. Someone wants to ask a question or to write the question in the chat. During expecting the questions, I will begin. In your model, how do you consider the needs for grid investment?
Yeah. So overall, this is a hybrid model. So we use two models, one called Expanse and PIPESA. And the Expanse model itself does the near optimal allocation of generation capacity. So then this run, it just allocates creates many diverse generation scenarios. And then what we do is we use PIPESA as a post hoc cost optimization of hourly generation, storage, and transmission, and also a long-term storage and transmission capacity investment. So what the model does is it gets these generation capacities and then post hoc cost optimize the grid infrastructure that is needed to make these scenarios feasible. And we use, we basically, what we do is we also, due to the complexity of the problem, we also aggregate the transmission grid into a reduced complexity
nodes. Yes, yeah.
Nodes into nodes, yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Maybe there is a question from Regina.
Yeah, hello, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned before that nuclear helps the integration of renewables, which sounded for me a bit surprising. Is it because nuclear usually is in the base load and the renewables are very volatile? So yeah, the general view is that nuclear and renewables don't work so well together, but is it because it's in the base load and you need just base load, or what was your point there? Yeah. I was just surprised.
Yeah, it's a valid question. So I think it's also linked to the fact that the targets of 2035 aim to decrease, the aims for a very strong decrease in fossil fuels. So therefore, you don't have any more of this flexible generation there. But there is some flexibility, or even higher flexibility. There's some flexibility in nuclear generation that is possible. So we assume that nuclear can assist to flexibilize to provide to a certain degree some flexible generation as well. But of course, there's also additional storage needed for hydrogen and also battery, which is then needed if you achieve very, very high amounts of renewable electricity. But basically, this comes from our assumption that there is, to a certain degree, some flexibilization. So we have like maximum ramp rates that are based on historic patterns. And we also have a minimum base load that we enforce for nuclear generation. but we don't assume that it's completely flexible, of course, nuclear.
Yes, because in fact, even if nuclear is often used as a constant power for some of power plants, but it is possible for some units to make some load following finally.
Yeah,
it is something we can observe in, for example, in France. But it seems that it depends also on where we are regarding to the aging of the nuclear fuel finally. So, but I know that in France, as we have much nuclear power plants, there are some specific control to be able to make partially some load following.
Yeah.
After it depends on the flexibility, maybe sometimes at a shorter time. There are also some question about that.
Yeah. So for sure in France, it's I think even from the regulation that nuclear power plants have to have be able to have very strong ramp rates to provide load following. So the technical potential is of course much higher than what we modeled, which is just the historical patterns. So we were quite conservative with the flexibilization of nuclear power plants in our model.
Okay, so any other questions? So if there is no other questions, so I will thank all the presenters for this session and all the attendees and for the questions. And so thank you very much, and have a good day or have a good night, depending on where you are on the earth. So thank you very much. Maybe I don't know if you have something special to say as a hosting session. No.
No, just thank you to the speakers for the very interesting presentations. And don't forget to upload your slides on your dashboard, please. And that's it for me. So have a great day.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you and have a great day.
Bye.